Welcome to Shore Perspectives, a community feature of WESR Radio, highlighting the spirit of the shore from those who call it home.
I'm M.K. Miles. I live here at Saxis, and this is the Saxis Museum that we're in right now. This is our big day here at Saxis. One day a year. I tell people we have more visitors today than we do all the rest of the year put together. So, we started the museum back before Hurricane Sandy. We got our charter from the state of Virginia, and we got our 501c3 tax certification from the IRS. So we were a museum on paper, but we had no building. So we ended up renting half of the post office building for about a year. Well, we still rent it, but we set up shop in there. And this building that we're in is the old Crockett store, built in 1910. About 300 yards down the road, and moved in 1912 to this spot. It was drug up the road with mules and logs. They just drug it up here in 1922 and put it on this site where it's been since 1922. So we were looking for a home, and we thought about this building, and Hurricane Sandy did damage to it. The National Park Service got $50 million out of the Hurricane Sandy Recovery Fund, and the state of Virginia Department of Historic Resources was trying to find any historic buildings damaged by Sandy so they could use their grant allocation. So they contacted us. We got the building and the town on the National Register, and we got a grant from them to restore the building, not just repair it and put a roof back on it, to try to take it back to the way it looked when it was built in 1910. So what you're looking at today is about what this building looked like in 1910. In the 1920s here at Saxis, there's 650 people living here. Today there's somewhere between 150 and 200, depending on what day of the year it is. In the summer it's full, and the winter it's not full. We went through the grant process, we got the money, and we hired a guy named Chip Knock from up in just north of the Merlin line in Stockton, Merlin, who is into building restoration. He did a phenomenal job here. So when you look at it today, it looks probably just as good as it did the day it was built. It's about 80% original. And so Chip had a little sawmill of his own, and so he would take a piece of like the beadboard, that's the walls and ceiling. He'd take a section of it home with him, have the tools cut for his sawmill so he could cut new beadboard to match. He did the same thing on the pine siding on the outside, and he restored the floor, and parts of it were wore too thin, so he had a building he tore down in Pocomoke, Maryland, that was built the same year this one was built here at Saxis. So he had matching flooring, which is pretty amazing. So what you see here today is thanks to the National Park Service's funding and Chip's Knock skills that you see this beautiful little building here. It was damaged by Sandy in October of 12, and we got on the National Register in November of 17. So it was a 5-year process. Yeah, well, you know, people at Saxis, some people throw everything away and some people keep it forever. I was sort of lucky that that my mom and her family, my grandfather, who was a working waterman here, kept everything. We had tons of stuff off of his old 1929 Chesapeake Bay boat, and a lot of stuff of his. The store owner's granddaughter, Hannah Tull, she kept a lot of stuff from her grandfather's store. Jim Lewis, the great-grandson of the store owner here, Severin Crockett, who who owned the store from the 20s on, he kept a lot of the material here. It was his family who kept the store running up and through the 70s, and then Jim had a pool hall in here in the 80s. He kept some of the canner, not the canners, but the showcases, and some of the things you'll see around in here, the vinegar pumps and the clocks and the lights. See, the light in the corner there was actually an oil lamp hanging. The 4 oil lamps were hanging in here until they got electricity. So we do have some things that are original to the store. But our other stroke of luck besides the grant was Kurt Mariner, who passed away a few years ago. He helped us write the book, or he wrote the book about the history of Saxis, which had a lot to do with us getting on the National Register. When they wanted to see some paperwork to document what was going on, his book and the sources he used for his book were considered the authentic sources for us getting on the National Register. So the fact that Kurt helped us with a book in 2011, the year before Sandy, I mean, it's just sort of like magic here. The book, Hurricane Sandy, the grant. of the museum. The whole thing is sort of just like the perfect storm. I just happen to be a guy sitting back, being retired and interested in Saxis history. I was sort of the guy that shepherded through the process. But when Kurt passed, he had a personal museum up in New Church that used to be a store. Before that it was a church, then a store. He didn't have it open to the public, but he put a lot of his collectibles in there. So a lot of the store paraphernalia you see in here was Kurt's. So when they settled his estate, we got all of his store paraphernalia. And then we had a guy named Alan Thornton, who runs an antique shop out on 13. He brought us a pickup load of store paraphernalia too. So, at first when we opened up in here, we almost had nothing in here. And then within 6 months, we started filling it up. And then local people here on the island would bring something in, says, I don't see, you got one of these, you got one of those. So anyway, we ended up with the buy boats, our theme here, and that's what's on our hat, the little logo, the Chesapeake Bay buy boat. Growing up here in the 50s and 60s, we had a harbor full of these 65-foot boats that were hauling oysters and oyster shells around the Chesapeake Bay. And we got a lot of paraphernalia from them. We got some oyster cans in here. We have an Indian arrowhead collection. When the beach washes away back here on high tides and in storms, arrowheads would pop up on the beach. We had those arrowhead collection evaluated by the College of William and Mary, and we have about 20 some of them back there, and they're numbered. And the college told us where the stone came from and how old it was. So the oldest arrowhead is about 10,000 years old. Yeah, 7,200 BC, somewhere between 7,200 and 8,000 BC. The interesting thing about the arrowhead collection is that the arrowheads are made from stone from North Carolina and from Pennsylvania. The native stone on the eastern shore does not lend itself to carving and cutting arrowheads out of it. We have a few native ones from the shore, but most of them are from Pennsylvania and New Jersey. So to add to the town history is, leading up on that arrowhead collection is, the town was named Sykes' Island after a guy named Robert Sykes, who had the land patented by the colony in 1666. And that's when they started calling it Sykes' Island, S-I-K-E-S. And the spelling has changed from S-I-K-E-S to S-Y-K-E-S, and then eventually they took the K out, and it was S-E-X-E-S, Saxis, and now it's S-A-X-I-S. And I guess if you have the dialect, all those spellings sound the same if you're talking to somebody. About 1750, 55. That's when the Marshall family came down from Somerset County to the north end of the island. It's only 3 miles across the Pocomoke Sound. That was not a long trip. And then the Crockett's came from Tangier, and the Lewises came up from Guilford, and the Mileses, my family, came down Masonga Creek. And so the people here today are all descended from those people who started moving in here about 1750. So our history here on the island is 250 years. But if you trace those families back from where they came from, then a lot of people here on the island will have ancestors who came through Jamestown. So they're all eligible for the Jamestown Society. And I tell them that, and they go, yeah, right. Because they know their great-grandparents and maybe their great-great-grandparents, but everybody can't tell you their line back to, Jamestown. But a lot of the people from Saxis can do that. And so I have this thing on the internet called the Miles Files that people can use to access to see where their families came from, to see if they go that far back. So this thing about the history of Saxis and the genealogy and being retired and living on a Corps of Engineers pension, I have the time to do what I want. So it's working out wonderful for me. I'm living in the house I grew up in. I'm 72 years old. I was born in Nassau-Wattox in a hospital and came back and moved into that house in 49, and my parents owned it for years, and then I bought it before they passed, and now it's mine. So what I like about this little town is it looks a lot like it did when I grew up here in the 50s and 60s. When you come across about 3 miles of marsh before you get here, and when you come out of the woods line and you look at Saxis today, okay, and today is 2021, and I'm sure that my grandfather, great-great-grandfather Parker Miles, when he came along that same way and came out here in 1820, 200 years ago, when he saw the island from 3 miles away, I'm sure it looked to him exactly like it looks today to me when I make that trip. Other people grow up in places that have developed, in cities that have grown, and they live in urban sprawl, and everything around them is only 10 years old. And when you come to Saxis, though, you get that 3-mile trip of looking at it the same way it looked 200 years ago and probably 1,000 years ago when the Indians were going back and forth to here. So to me that's important because this is my roots. I grew up here, and I know my family have been here on this island for 250 years, but before that they've been on the eastern shore for 400 years since they came across from Great Jamestown. I like to give the people the option, if they're interested in their roots, if they're interested in where they grew up and the history of the place, they can do that. Some people from Saxis don't care about their history. That's fine with me. They come in and look at what's in the store. They look at what was going on here when they were kids. But if you talk to them about, do you know your family back 10 generations? Well, no, that's the grandfather's about as far as they go. That's fine too. But I like to give the people the option, if they really want to know about what's going on and what happened and why things happened and how it happened and things like that, then they have the opportunity to do that. And what really I enjoy doing most about sitting in here at the museum, when someone comes in and says, and I always ask them, where are you from? And if they say Pennsylvania, there's one story we talk about. If they say, well, I didn't grow up here, but my grandmother grew up here. And they say, do you remember, Grandma Susie somebody, and I go, I do remember them. And then I say, would you like to see their grave? And they go, what do you mean? I said, let's get on the golf cart and I'll show you where they're buried. And I've actually taken people out on the golf cart, showed them where their ancestors are buried, and a tear comes to their eye, and then I get a hug that says, I'm so glad I came to Saxis today. I had no idea I get to talk to you. I get to see the story of Saxis. I could buy a book about the history of Saxis, and I could see where my grandmother's buried. Got a guy from Georgia whose grandparents were from Saxis, and he finally found me on the Miles Files, and then he wants to come and see his grandmother's grave, and that kind of stuff. And I've had other people, not just from Saxis, but from Anancock and Cashville, and I remember one day this guy came up and brought his wife with him, and he hadn't been to the Eastern Shore, and he'd never been to the Eastern Shore, but he said his dad told him about the Eastern Shore. And we walked through Anancock Cemetery looking for his ancestors' graves, and he found them. And then we're walking down the street in Anancock, and he said, they were in the jewelry business, weren't they? And I said, yeah, they were. That was the Duncan family. And we walked by C.D. Marsh Jewelry, and I stopped right in front of the door, and I said, this is the jewelry store they owned. And he goes, oh, they changed the name of it. I said, yeah, but just look down. As you go into the Marsh Jewelry's in Anancock, carved into a concrete block as you walk in the door is the name Duncan. That did it. He broke down. He couldn't believe it. It's just moments like that that make all this work pay off. When it gets to a personal level, when somebody contacts you and appreciates what you've done and get the chance to see it. That to me, that's when I retired at the age of 60, everybody was surprised that I wasn't going to renew my engineer's license. And I said, I don't want to be an engineer anymore. I want to do the history of Saxis, and that's what I've been doing, since I retired in '08. So I'm enjoying it immensely, and I enjoy people that are interested in their history. And I understand that some people aren't. That's okay too. But I want to give those two that are interested the option of seeing it.
For Shore Perspectives and WESR Radio, I'm Kelley Gaskell.